Welcoming today Dr. Michael Hosokawa as our speaker. Dr. Hosokawa has had a full day. He's been speaking to various groups, and I think we've gotten some really good ideas about problem-based learning and about looking at our curriculum, at our courses, at our teaching a different way. Dr. Hosokawa is professor of family and community medicine at the University of Missouri School of Medicine. He's been there for quite some time, and in his time there, in fact early in his time there, he was commissioned to change the curriculum of the University of Missouri School of Medicine to move into the 90s at that time, to try something radically different. That difference is problem-based learning. I worked a bit with Dr. Hosokawa when I was on faculty at the University of Missouri myself. Then when I went to Tennessee, we were facing a crisis in teacher education. Teacher education over the past 20 years has faced a great deal of criticism. Part of that criticism has to do with the linkage or the connection of coursework in teacher education to actual practice in being a teacher. That's what problem-based learning is about. It's an authentic way to learn content within the context of practice. Dr. Hosokawa came to Tennessee and essentially is the father of PBL in teacher education in Tennessee because he changed the whole state. To this day, teacher education in Tennessee is based on problem-based learning. Based at least on those two instances, and he has a much greater history than that, Dr. Hosokawa has a rich knowledge base, a rich set of expertise to share with us about how we can look at our own curriculum and our own courses in a different way to increase the authenticity, the relevance, the engagement of our students and their learning. So I don't want to take any more of his time. I'm excited to hear what he has to say, and so please join me in welcoming Dr. Hosokawa.
Thank you. That's one of those introductions that my father would appreciate and my mother would believe. My relationship with Dean Short and with his wife has been one of the most rewarding professionally that I've had and hope would continue, and I very much appreciate being invited here to the University of Houston Clear Lake. So what I've seen so far, what I've heard so far, and what I've experienced so far leads me to believe that this is a very forward-looking institution, one that could consider change. But if problem-based learning, or if you want to call it project-based learning, might be a part of the curricular change that would enhance learning. So what we're really talking about here is that the status quo is unacceptable, and we're always looking for better ways to do things. So my plan is to go through a fairly formalized slide set that I put together to talk about the background and the structure of problem-based learning. And then I know that some of you have to go at various times. You have class commitments or other kinds of things. So, I'm used to physicians whose pagers go off in these kinds of meetings all the time. Now, in most cases, they told their staff assistant to page them 15 minutes into the presentation. So if they didn't like it, they could leave. And it's amazing that a fair number continue to sit there, and you think, what happened to their patient? But if there are people who want to stay longer than the formal part of the presentation, I did bring a sample case and actually would put you in a learning situation and work through that. But you will not have to take notes unless you really want to, because I'm going to leave this slide set with Dr. Short. And so if there are pieces and parts of it that you would like to review, you're welcome to do that. Basically, what we're asking today is what's wrong with education? I hear so many times, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's not only bad grammar, but it's pretty lazy thinking. We never did it that way before. We've got a generation of learners coming along who are much different than our peers. And so we get into the situation of teaching the way we learned, and it doesn't fit anymore for today's learners. Unfortunately, we tend to teach that there is one right answer and one pathway for getting to that answer. And this is really squelching creative thinking. We used to have problems like this. If a train leaves the station at 8 o'clock going 40 miles an hour and the train B leaves the station at 9 going 50 miles an hour, when does train B run into the back of train A? Now, I've never used that or had to use that. So when Dr. Short talks about using real or authentic cases, I think that's one of the keys. We teach like we learn, homework, lesson plans, that sort of thing really is not consistent with creative learning. And technology is changing the way we communicate and the way we observe. Now, we were trying to teach our students to do a patient history. And so in a simulated situation, they interviewed a mock patient and took a history. One of the things we asked was, what's the patient's mood? I don't know. Well, how did the patient appear? Well, he just sat there. Did he appear differently? Was he excited? Was he tense? Was he worried? Was he in pain? I don't know. Many of our students today are so used to communicating with people that they don't see. I flew in here and the flight attendant said you could use your cell phone now, and about 2/3 of the group on the plane were talking to people who weren't there. And our students have lost their sense of nonverbals. So they're not observing how people are communicating. They're simply listening. Well, it's a good thing to listen, but you need nonverbals too. And I think we are overemphasizing evaluation. Those of you who are accredited, whose programs are accredited, or you're thinking about licensing or licensure or certification and so on, we've gotten to the point where that's really been carried too far, and it's the tail wagging the dog. And it's also interfering with creative education. So we say the future is really, if it ain't broke, make it better. The status quo is unacceptable. And what we're emphasizing with problem-based learning is it's just-in-time learning. Professionals learn just in time. That's when it's needed. That's in a context. Versus just-in-case learning, which is just in case it's on the test. And what we're trying to do is to get away from rote memorization long enough to pass the test and get information that you use and apply and you remember in a context, because we learn as stories. We learn about each other by exchanging stories. We learn about life with stories. We solve problems, and that gets stored as a story. So we're talking about learner-centered education rather than faculty-centered education. We're learning to use the internet because it's an external brain. I guess facetiously we say where there's death, there's hope. Faculty turnover is good because some faculty have been able to adapt. Other faculty can't adapt to this. And thinking and problem solving is hopefully replacing memorization. Now, we've made a lot of progress. I was very disappointed. I'm no longer in the dean's office, and I was disappointed that today's leadership put this picture at the top out as the new University of Missouri anatomy lab. That anatomy lab looks like it did 50 years ago. This is Stanford's anatomy lab. This is creativity. This is using today's technology for teaching anatomy. University of Missouri, building a new building with a lecture hall. Stanford University, a lot of small group learning and use of technology. This is the kind of forward thinking we need to think about. Some of you are old enough to remember the bookmobile. Came around every once in a while, and you could go check out books, and then it came and you checked your book in and checked new one out. This is today's bookmobile. Come and download. So these are the learners that we're dealing with. Learners who are technically savvy, learners who know how to use the internet as an external brain. The challenge for today's teachers is that can our teachers teach for a world that they cannot imagine? Now, one example I used when I was in school, we learned to do square root. I could do square root with a tablet and a pencil. It took me about 3 pages, but I had the formula memorized. And then a few years later, people were giving out these little credit card-sized calculators that would do it in one stroke. So we have to be able to teach for a world that we don't really conceptualize of. There is a knowledge explosion today. About 50% of what we give our students what we teach our students today is going to be obsolete. It's going to change, or it's going to be incorrect in about 4 to 7 years. So the half-life of biomedical knowledge today is about 4 to 7 years. For us, it means that what we teach our medical students today will be out of date. Half of it will be out of date by the time that they're in practice. And this is, of course, the internet, or a conceptualization of the internet. Tremendous encyclopedia of everything. It's the external brain. What you have to be able to do is to use it wisely, because there's some junk in there. This was a computer, home computer, as it was conceptualized in 1960. Now, I don't think anyone really has one of these. So the role of the teacher is changing. The role of the teacher is changing now from being the lecturer and the authority of everything and giving you knowledge as you understand it, to trying to think futuristically, to being the coach. Now, in 1989, 1990, we had a new dean, Lester Bryant, who's standing in front. Every one of those plaques behind is a former dean, so we call this the Hall of Dead Deans. But Lester was one of those forward thinkers. Lester was the one who really began to tell us that the status quo was unacceptable. And so Lester called me and he said, I want to change the curriculum. It's a perfectly preserved 1960s curriculum and it's 1990. And I said, sure, we can buff up anatomy and buff up physiology. And he said, no, I want you to change it. I want you to change it to the way people learn. Well, it's really a lot of fun and scary when the dean says, we're going to change. I'm not going to tell you how it's changing, but we're going to change because there has to be a better way of doing things. That's the kind of thing I'm hearing from Dean Short, is that let's explore better ways of doing things. And when you have a leader like that, that's an opportunity. So the challenge to us was to prepare students who would live in a world we can't imagine. Our graduates are never a finished product, that we're into teaching lifelong learning. Life is the application of knowledge to solve problems. That's what we're all about. As children, we had to learn the best way to get to school without getting run over. We had to solve our problems in order to function. So that, and also being a teacher or being a scientist or being a health professional is fun. So that learning to be one of these professionals should be fun also, and that problem-based learning we found to be more fun than sitting in a lecture listening to somebody pontificate. And so what we're focusing on is just-in-time learning it now when we can apply it and in a context, versus just-in-case learning, just in case it's on the test. So we're trying to look at ways that we can create a method for just-in-time learning, because just-in-case learning, a lot of it was rote memorization, had little relevance to the student, and was totally out of context. Now for the educators, you know Bloom's taxonomy. In the traditional curriculum, almost all of the activity went on in the lower sections of the taxonomy. What we're trying to move is to put learning up in the upper part of the pyramid. Let me review just briefly what the medical school curriculum looks like. The first 2 years are learning the basic sciences: anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, microbiology, and all the other ologies. The second 2 years is clinical practice. Take these students, put them on the wards, and now they're learning patient care. No crossover between. During the first 2 years, they sat in lecture about 40 to 50 hours a week. And it was for them, it was like drinking out a fire hose. Just so much information coming at them to, they thought, memorize. And they learn from professors and from books. As you know, books are out of date before they're in print. Professors, many of them, badly out of date, unless they're making an effort to keep up. For the scientists, how many times did you learn the Krebs cycle? Probably 7 for me, and I still don't know it. Put it into a context, might remember it. Oops. So we had what I called a bucket curriculum. We had an anatomy bucket and a biochemistry bucket and a physiology bucket, and the students learned all those sciences in isolation from others. So they learned about the heart structure in anatomy. They were able to dissect the heart out of the cadaver. Biochemistry, how's the heart affected by the biochemistry of the body? No idea. Had to wait until second semester to find that out. How's the heart function? Too bad. You got to wait for second semester for that too. So one of the first things I wanted to do was to integrate our curriculum so that students would learn things in a context again, rather than in isolation. And so it would begin to make sense. Some of the professors that I talked to had never met faculty in the other departments. So we wanted to create a curriculum for professionals in a way that professionals learn. That is just-in-time learning. We learn through stories. When you meet somebody, they say, well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm from Dallas, and I went to school at Texas Southwestern. That's how we get to know each other. Didn't tell us much about the person. But as you get to know that person more, you begin to exchange stories, and that's the way we get to know people. In the same way, that's the way we can learn, is that we learn through stories. And of course, traditionally, the groups or cultures pass down knowledge through stories. Students can learn without being taught. That was hard for some of our faculty to accept. One of the microbiologists came to me and he said, wait a minute, I want to make sure that my 8 lectures on cholera remain in the curriculum. I don't want you to revise those out. And I said, well, I'm going to give you one class meeting to talk about cholera. He said the entire class will be incompetent, you're going to be guilty of educational malpractice, so on. I said, Dick, we haven't had a case of cholera in Missouri in 30 years. They're still going to be incompetent. And he's still mad at me. In problem-based learning, which is the curriculum we were designing, the students teach each other. So that to teach is to learn twice, because you not only learn it, but you have to learn to break it down, to put it into context, and then teach it. We emphasize skills over just content, so that it's not only the learning skill, the teaching skill, but also learning the content. And so we wanted experiential learners rather than people who were simply sitting in a lecture and supposedly soaking in lots of information. And I spent some time sitting in the back of the lecture halls, and I would say maybe at least 25% of the students were either on eBay or Amazon. But they were also recording the lecture so that you just made sure they got everything. So problem-based learning was the development of authentic patient cases, developed as a mystery. They were formatted to unfold. The PBL process is to receive the introductory material on this patient case, review it, analyze the problems, and clarify descriptions and learn new terms. Then an open and free discussion of the problem where the learners bring in their own knowledge and their experiences. Development of hypotheses, what could this be? And articulate learning objectives. What is it we need to know in order to move forward with this patient case? Some self-study, sharing of information, refining the hypotheses, testing them through additional information gathering, and then continue to an outcome or a diagnosis. And with some of our cases, it's to continue to a management plan for that patient. So we have a puzzling skin lesion. Janet Brothers comes on April 5th, combing her hair. She notes that she's got this small red swollen area on the back of her neck. It wasn't painful. She continued her normal daily activities. The swelling increased, the redness continued. It spread across her neck and her upper chest. And throughout the day, by late afternoon, the swelling became quite painful, and she experienced no dysphagia, which is a doctor talk for she didn't have any loss of vocabulary or ability to speak. She had no sore throat. She had no shortness of breath. So that's what the students get. Again, they're working in groups of 8. The sessions The problem-based learning sessions will take place on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. And it's all morning. So they're sitting in these groups of 8 of students randomly selected from the class. So each group is mixed with disciplines, with background, with experience, may have nurses in a group, may have social workers in a group, may have musicians in a group. They all got into medical school because they had to take 4 required courses: chemistry, physics, advanced math, and biology. But that's the common denominator. So all of them brought unique experiences, unique background, unique understandings. That's the case. Now it's up to the group. So they ask, what causes the lesions? She has no sore throat, no shortness of breath. Why is it getting worse? They wouldn't know what dysphagia is, usually. So if I were facilitating the group, my natural reaction would be, I'll tell you, because I'm an expert. My role as a facilitator is learning objective. You guys don't need to go find out. So that the facilitator is not a content expert in this group of 8 students, which has a group of 8 and a faculty facilitator who is not a content expert. Another case, Jennifer Moretto. She has complaining of a stomach ache and becomes more painful. What more information do you want? You got to know what Jennifer's been doing. Did she eat anything strange? Has she been around kids with similar symptoms? Have they traveled? So that the students have to develop the questions which help the diagnostic process. This is all based on constructivist learning theory, which says that we learn in a context. That's basically what it says. It's a lot fancier than that. But if you want to know more about constructivist learning theory, that's a learning objective for you. Go research it. So the role of a faculty member has changed from being the source of all knowledge to being a coach. And this is simulation at its best. Now, you wouldn't want your pilot to be learning on you. So they go through a simulation training. They get realistic situations that they must solve in the simulator. So problem-based learning is learning to be a doctor rather than about what a doctor is or what a doctor does. They are in the situation where they are actually problem solving a situation. They are the doctor versus this is what doctors do. So this is a form of simulation. Now, I know some of you are more experienced with things like game theory, like role playing, those kinds of things. All of this is simulation. Those of you in the behavioral sciences, you work on cases. Law uses cases. Medicine was using straight lecture, feeding information, one right answer. And so we had to change. And so one of the ways in which we changed was to think more about simulation. Simulation has tremendous potential for learning, particularly in the health professions, in teaching, and in the behavioral sciences. So what we designed was a curriculum. We have, in year 1, we have 4 10-week blocks. Each block is 8 weeks for learning, or 8 cases, 1 case each week. 1 week for evaluation, no pop quizzes, no midterms, focus on learning, and then 1 week break. 4 blocks in the first year, 32 cases. In year 2, same thing, at a more advanced level. So in block 1, the cases all focus around those areas, biochemistry, anatomy, genetics, not in isolation, but rather integrated. So the patient may present with weakness, urgency to urinate. The case then would unfold, and they would have to integrate the biochemical issues, the genetic issues. If this were a case of diabetes, what are the genetic familial issues, if any? What are the anatomical issues? What's the function of the islets and Langerhans? So on. So they have to put all that together. And we pick a case specifically because it engages some of those factors in the first block. Second block, you can see the topics. Third block, endocrine's pretty complex, so we kind of allowed extra time. Neuroscience is a very integrative topic on its own, and that's why there are fewer there. Microorganisms and immune response. Now, this isn't the only part of the curriculum, because the students are also getting skills. So that in block 1, they're learning to take a history, in block 2, do a physical exam or the fundamentals of a physical exam, psychosocial aspects of medicine and epidemiology. In year 2, looks very similar, again, with the topic areas around which we build the cases. You'll notice that the introduction to patient care has been flipped to the morning. Basic science PBL is in the afternoon. We do the PBL in the afternoon to take the load off the library, so that the first year students are in the libraries in the afternoon. Second year students are in the libraries in the morning. So year 1 looks like this. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they have problem-based learning for the entire morning. We did not do away with lectures. This is a hybrid program, so we did not simply eliminate lectures, because lecture is a good way of learning. It just is overdone. And the lectures had to be conceptual, and they had to meet certain objectives. It isn't just come in and pontificate on whatever you want. And then in the afternoon, there were 2 days each week that were reserved for individual study. No faculty could put anything in those 2 days. We told the anatomists, you cannot tell the students, you need to be in the anatomy lab this afternoon, because it would be, if you know what's good for you. Can't tell the students that. If the students came to the anatomist and said, would you meet us in the lab this afternoon and go over something with us, that's okay. So again, we put faculty in a role of being a consultant. And then year 2, you've seen that it's a reverse. And just for your information, the clinical curriculum, year 3 is what we call clerkships, internal medicine, pediatrics, specialties that they get. And then year 4 are the advanced clinical selectives, where they're actually selecting clinical blocks where they would learn cardiology, or they would learn critical care or emergency medicine, depending on which direction they're headed. So we had a problem-based learning group, facilitator, students. They're getting the case a page at a time, taking notes, discussing, developing hypotheses. You can see they've written stuff all over the board. They've written things on the flip chart. They're tracking things. get involved in a very vigorous discussion. There are 8 members of the group. There is one, what we call a tutor. It's actually the faculty facilitator. Start with a quarterback. That is one of the students who is running the discussion, and a quarterback or a scribe who's taking notes on everything. The role of quarterback and the role of the scribe rotates around, so every student gets a shot at leadership. They present new ideas, they get feedback on these ideas, they work at problem solving as a group. A lot of the students bring previous knowledge and experiences. In fact, they may get the diagnosis right off the bat. Oh, well, my Aunt Minnie had that. But the students will say, wait, okay, great, now we know the diagnosis. Let's learn the basic science behind it. And so they know that they may get the diagnosis right off the bat. That isn't the end point. It's self-directed collaborative learning and also developing interpersonal skills. Up above you see that they've called in an anatomy faculty as a consultant. And they work in groups outside of the problem-based learning group. They get together and they continue to discuss things. Now, when I got the assignment to change the curriculum, the first thing I did was, okay, we're going to change. I'm not sure how we're going to change, but we're going to change. Well, when you try and bring change into a traditional setting, it's like moving a cemetery. You really never understand or realize how many friends the dead have until you try and move a cemetery. Change is hard for people. There are winners and there are losers when you have change. There are people who are going to lose something because of the change. There are also people who are going to gain things because of the change. And you have to be sensitive to that. We knew at that time that McMaster University and Harvard and Southern Illinois and Wake Forest in New Mexico were experimenting with this problem-based learning that we had heard about. And so we sent faculty to observe what they were doing. Faculty came back and said, oh, that's kind of exciting. We ought to think about it. It was a happy accident that Harvard was one of the first to move in this direction. But it really originated with McMaster in Canada. And so we thought, okay, this is kind of the way we want to go. So as the visiting teams learned about new strategies for medical education, they brought it back and they talked to other people. We wanted to engage faculty, more and more faculty, and we couldn't send them all out for visits. So we then offered problem-based learning sessions to faculty groups of 8, and they could try it out. It's kind of like try it with a drive, test drive it. So they participated in these groups, and some of them came away saying this is a waste of time, and others came away saying, this has some possibilities. We developed a critical mass of faculty willing to make a change. And then we began to design the curriculum, and again using interdisciplinary design committees so that we could really talk about the integration of concepts and knowledge rather than simply polishing or buffing up the old curriculum. And so we ended up with a curriculum. We have no department courses in the first 2 years. We do not have anatomy or biochemistry or microbiology. We do not have those courses. Everything is integrated. And my mantra in the first 2 years was homeostasis. That is, the body in disease is out of balance. And that's what we need to stress to the students. Disease isn't just an isolated thing. It is when the body's out of balance in some way or another. And so we need to teach balance, and then we need to teach the pathology or the loss of balance. Now, in order to